So now knowing why China didn't discover the New World, we're going to go back to Europe and focus on the situation there. European expansion from 1400 to 1550 is really led by the Iberian Peninsula. And the Iberian Peninsula are the countries of both Spain and Portugal. They will be the pioneers of the European age of exploration. And their motivations there are a couple motivations. So first and foremost, economics and trade. It's the East, it's China, it's India. That's where all the trade goods are. China has the silk, China has the porcelain, India has the spices. Spain and Portugal, they want those trade goods, but in order to access them, they're going to try and find a more direct route there, one by sea specifically. There's also religious motivations by both of these countries. Spain and Portugal are both Catholic countries. They're both going to be seeking converts. And a third motivation is the legacy of the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars that occurred in the 1200s. And there's still a rivalry between the Christian and the Muslim world around the 14 and 1500s. And so another one of these motivations is going to be seeking an alternate route to the Holy Land in the Middle East, and perhaps have an avenue to reconquer the Holy Land by going by boat rather than by land. So economics, religion, some political motivations, but nonetheless, it's going to be the Iberian Wave that begins European exploration. Now, beginning with Portugal, Portugal in some senses is the most desperate. It is geographically located the furthest away from China. So by the time you get spices and silk and other things arriving to Portugal, the price has already been marked up. And so Portugal maybe has the biggest incentive to try and find an alternate trade route into Asia. The interesting thing about European exploration is the means by which they do it, or the tools. You can look at technology that was essential to the Portuguese exploration, things like the magnetic compass, the lateen or triangular sail. And what will make the Portuguese more formidable than any other maritime power is the fact that they use cannon on their ships, and that technology derives from gunpowder. Every single one of those technological innovations, and even the Portuguese ship, the Caravel itself, many of those technological innovations were not invented in Europe. The compass and gunpowder were invented in China. The triangular sail was invented in the Muslim world. Europe benefits greatly from having long-distance trade with these various parts of the old world. And what that means is that technology and ideas will also spread. So, Europe, Spain, and Portugal, they benefit greatly from a long-distance trade that has existed in the old world for thousands of years. And when the Portuguese begin to explore, what they find is the western coast of Africa. And unlike the Vikings, they do find something of value there. And the Portuguese begin to develop a trade with the western coast of Africa, the Gold Coast, as it will be called. The Portuguese will be interested in things like ivory, gold, slaves. People in Africa will be interested in Portuguese weapons and other things of that nature. So there's reasons to continue exploring. You even have individuals like Prince Henry, who will dedicate his resources to building a navigation school and really promoting Portuguese exploration with every opportunity he can. Now, some major breakthroughs in Portugal's exploring of the oceans comes with Bartholomew Diaz, who is the first one to figure out that Africa could be rounded. That was unknown at the time. The hope was that you could actually sail from Europe to China, but that was unknown. And so it was very important that Diaz discovered that, in fact, you could go around. But it wasn't until a couple of years later that Vasco da Gama became the very first Portuguese to get to India. And this, da Gama's trip yielded an enormous profit. He wasn't very well prepared, and in fact, when Vasco da Gama arrived in India, he wasn't very welcome. But he traded what he had and was able to yield a profit of 3,000%. And so this becomes a major cash cow for the Portuguese. And with the help of caravels who are armed with cannons, the Portuguese will begin to carve out a sphere of influence in the Indian Ocean. And it's going to be the spice trade going from India around Africa back to Portugal that will yield the most amount of profit for them. Now, Spain is also going to be part of these voyages, but Spain is a little bit later to the game. One of the reasons is because Spain has been fighting a 700-year-long war with the Muslim occupiers of the Iberian Peninsula, known as the Reconquista. And this also gives you an idea of where Spain and the Muslim world, or the Catholic and Muslim world, stand. The spirit of the Crusades is still very much alive. Spain will also unite their crowns. They become a relatively new empire and are looking for a way to get ahead in terms of this age of exploration. This is where we introduce Christopher Columbus, who was a sailor. He had sailed on a number of Portuguese ships. He had been to Iceland. He's a guy who knows how to sail. Christopher Columbus is going to pose an idea to the Spanish monarchs, suggesting that he could get to Asia quicker than the Portuguese can, or that the Portuguese claim they can. And what Columbus says is that the world is actually much smaller than it is, and that he could sail into the Atlantic Ocean and pop up on the other side in Asia. Now, most people understand that Columbus's idea is a little bit crazy. In fact, Columbus is turned down when he asks for sponsorship for his voyages. The King of France turns him down. But Spain is willing to take this risk. And so they give Columbus the resources that he needs. They build him 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. And he takes 90 men and he sails into the Atlantic Ocean, hoping that he's going to reach Asia. Now, what he discovers, in fact, is a new landmass. It's the New World, which was completely unknown to Europeans at the time. And he finds, some people there. He'll refer to them as Indians, believing that he's somewhere close to India. Now, when he returns back from his voyage to the New World, he obviously doesn't have any silk or spices or the trade goods that he promised, but he tells the Spanish monarchs that he can still make profit, and he can do that by bringing back slaves and gold. And so even though Spain doesn't initially find what they want, they do find some sort of economic resource in the New World. Now, the rivalry between Portugal and Spain will be put to rest with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. This is essentially an agreement splitting the world in half. It says that everything east of the treaty line belongs to Portugal, and that's because Portugal is pretty satisfied with their spice trade, and everything to the west belongs to Spain. Spain did not find Asia, but they still feel like they can make profit out of the New World. And so for the time being anyways, Spain and Portugal, 2 Catholic countries, it's in fact the Pope that is able to mediate this treaty. These 2 Catholic countries agree to split the world between them. And so Spain is going to have free reign over the New World and not have to worry about Portuguese interference. A couple of years later, the Spanish explorer Ferdinand Magellan will be the first one to circumnavigate the world, meaning sail around the entire world. And at this point, it was a matter of what Spain was going to do with their newfound colonies in the New World.